Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil A. Kulona, and this is Nashville. People from all over are moving to Nashville. Seriously, I've lived here for 3 years, and I feel like there's more people coming, but they are. And with the diversification of neighborhoods comes the diversification of mindset. And with that comes the occasional clash between beliefs. Clashes of beliefs occur when there are gaps in community and gaps in communication. Some are trying to find solutions to fill those gaps and in turn bring us all a little closer together. The Conversation Coalition is a group of believers and non-believers who convene on a monthly basis to reach common ground. Joining us now are Elliott Martin, co-founder of the Conversation Coalition, and Reverend Brandon Baxter. Elliott, Reverend Baxter, welcome to This Is Nashville.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Really great to have you both here. So, Elliott, you co-founded the Conversation Coalition, and you wanted to establish a space for open, non-judgmental dialogue between people that have radically different beliefs. Yeah. Before we get too far into the discussion, I want to take a listen to a clip that you provided, which may enlighten our listeners to see how this is achieved. Let's listen.
We get together and we have those conversations. We have discussions over topics like the existence of God, things that involve belief systems, atheistic opinions, and we have the conversations that you're told you're not supposed to have. We feel that by being taboo, what they're actually doing is these conversations are being held away from people where very important discussions could be had. And so our mission is basically just to prove that you can be friends, you can have a very civil discussion, you can have a quote unquote debate that doesn't involve any kind of anger or hostility of any kind. So we're just a group of friends who really like to talk in front of you guys and bring out the questions that would start a fight over Thanksgiving.
We want to have those conversations that are seemingly more and more difficult to have these days. Apparently, we're just gonna have to talk more about this in the future. Yes, we have some disagreements to have.
All right, so your mission is to have disagreements and be friends without any anger or hostility, even when holding a debate. I just had something like that a few weeks ago, meeting with a couple that I know. We had an intense debate about the failures of the Democratic Party in regards to the last election. We still remain friends. Yeah. Tell me this, why is it important that not just Nashville, but to our nation at the moment, to be able to have these type of tense conversations and still walk out with respect for each other?
Yeah, I think that's something, honestly, that underlies this nation as a whole. And the more I investigate different beliefs around the world, whether they're religious or not, I find that people do seem to agree on that. We do value each other, right? And it's just a matter of not allowing those disagreements to fester and grow in the shadows. The only way that we're ever going to come to a better answer, the only way that we are ever going to fix any of the problems that we all agree are problems, is if we get together and just talk about it. And we can't do that in a way where, we've seen a bunch online, we've seen a bunch in, all kinds of different shows that bring people on and they're yelling at each other constantly. And more, I'm having conversations with people where they mention those types of things and they say, Elliott, I didn't feel like we got anywhere. Like, I don't feel like either of those people know where the other person's coming from. And even though they both walk away saying, I want to fix this issue, this is a bad thing, we just can't make any progress on it. So how do we do that? Well, I think one way is we demonstrate to people that we can actually have these conversations. So we've been doing that for over a year now, and I can just say, knock on wood, but no fist fights yet.
Okay.
In fact, at the end of it, most everybody jumps up and finds somebody to talk to, and they are standing there till we get kicked out and laughing and hugging and stuff.
So you've been at this for, congratulations, I'm happy about that. You've been at this for a year, over a year. Was there some kind of inciting incident, a catalyst to bring this about?
Yeah. So over a year ago, there was myself and a couple of other atheists, non-religious, deconstructed people, right? And we had been going around to a couple of different events, and there was a friend of ours who was putting on these types of events, but sporadically. He just wasn't able to do them as regularly as we all wanted. Well, so we came together and just said, hey, look, if we got a team to kind of organize this stuff and work on it, could we put this on more often? And it just kind of grew from there. And next thing you know, we have 4 Christians, we have 4 atheists, and we're sitting around planning the next few months of events and where we're going to do them and what we're going to talk about. I think our first actual topic was like, is God real? You know, we just came out swinging. We went for the big one right away.
Yeah.
And really, since then, what we have found is every time we go out there and we tell somebody about what we do, everybody sounds really interested. There hasn't been a single person yet that said, you know, I just don't think that's a good way of doing this. I just don't think that's going to work out. So we've been thrilled. Our best event so far, we were standing around over at East Nashville Beer Works. There's about 40 of us in the room in a circle. And one of the organizers gets out in the middle, and he has a hat with a bunch of topics in them, just random topics. And he goes, hey guys, so we're going to do something a little different. Normally we have like 2 people on a stage, 30-minute back and forth, questions from the audience. Today, we're just going to pick a random topic from the hat. We're just going to bounce around to different people. We're going to talk about it for 20 minutes, and we're going to move on to the next one. And oh my gosh, that was so cool. Just seeing people just bouncing off of everybody, and one person, well, if you think that, I mean, how does that play into, you know, the gospel narrative? Or, well, if you're an atheist, how do you get this? Or, awesome, man. Just seeing people being able to express themselves in a way that is honest and compassionate. And that is the biggest thing. We want these discussions to be challenging, of course, but at the core of it is the cordial nature that we're demonstrating. That's what's so important. 4
atheists and 4 believers walk into a bar, have a conversation, and come out friends.
That's right. That's right.
It.
Yeah.
And now, Reverend Baxter, Brandon, what about the coalition compelled you to get involved?
Well, you know, some of the things that compelled me sound very much like what Elliott said compelled them to start the group in the first place. As I continue to be in ministry in a very polarized society, at a very polarized time, where both beliefs about not only religion, but many things, politics, the ways we understand how we live, all sorts of different things seem to be dividing us more than helping us come together in community. And as Elliott and I have talked a lot about this, we kind of have a common respect for the paying attention to the humanity of one another and the humanity of every person that we encounter. Now, he and I talk about that in different ways. I tend to talk about the imago Dei, or the image of God that I see reflected in each and every person. And sometimes that is helpful to me personally as a person of faith, because it helps me remember to love somebody even when I don't feel like loving them. You know, as I preached to my congregation just last week, I said, you know, sometimes love is more of an action than it is a feeling. And especially in these times where we are so divided, if we are going to come into community with one another, we have to be willing to put in the real work of reaching out and of hearing one another and of bridging those gaps. And so I found it very compelling when I met Elliott and Gary, who started the Conversation Coalition. They said, we would love for you to come and be a part of these groups. And it has just been a phenomenal experience, because in many ways, no matter who we have on the panel, no matter who shows up in the audience, whether they are a person of some kind of faith or they are atheist or agnostic, we all are looking for meaning. And we are all looking for a way to live with one another better. And that is very compelling to me in this age when it's hard to even do that within a church body right now.
What are some instances of a conversation where something just really, really, truly stuck with you? You felt an immediate sense of respect for the other people who had a different background and different views. I'd love to hear from both of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the ways that, how we actually got connected with Brandon initially was he was invited to speak at a local humanist group in the area. And they get together once a month. And, we talk about a lot of things, again, that while I wouldn't use the language imago Dei, right, we very much align on those issues about the goodness of people kind of innately inside of them and that we should foster that and kind of grow that. And there was a moment where in that first conversation, Brandon said something about how, look, for me at the end of the day, it doesn't necessarily matter about this. Let's go find the temple, that was destroyed in Israel, that Mark mentions, or let's go find these chariot wheels, or what. That's not really what drives me, right? What drives me in my belief is much more about how we engage with each other. And because so much of my experience has been online, dealing with, so I do some call-in shows and stuff where people call in and, hey, my God, this and whatever. And, we prove your God, it's a bit more contentious, right?
Yeah.
And oftentimes those arguments are very, very focused on, we've got the science that says this or the history of that. And so to have somebody that does hold a belief in a deity, does hold a belief in what I would say supernatural things, right? To have somebody say, look, for me at the end of the day, that isn't the main focus for me. The main focus is not this, let me do the math and get it all worked out and here's the answer on the board. Instead, it's much more about how I interact with the people around me and whether or not I'm living a life that is in line with that goodness and compassion. Because the reason that struck me so hard is because there are so many people on my side, in my camp, the atheists, the non-religious, they don't think that those people are out there. And they don't think that we can work with religious people. I hear it all the time. Well, if they believe some guy resurrected, 2,000 years ago, they won't blah. Well, hang on a second.
Yeah.
That's not really where a lot of these people are coming from. And the more that we have these conversations, honestly, the more that I find the vast majority of people are a lot more closer to Brandon than they are some of those people that seem to be really vocal online.
Yeah. Brandon, what experience did you have?
At our last conversation, after we actually had a panel that evening, and we had several Christian pastors, and then we had one of the atheists on the panel, and we were kind of talking about why we were relaunching the year, so why are we doing these conversations in general? So the topics went back and forth quite a bit, but at the end of the meeting, I had the opportunity to talk to one of the persons that was in the audience, a young adult woman, and she came up to me and she said, I really appreciated this, and I really appreciated space where I could feel comfortable and where I could sort of live into what I am experiencing. And what she said was, I grew up a person of faith. I grew up a religious person, a Christian person, and yet I found that the answers that I seemed to be getting, that seemed to be rote answers, weren't quite working for me anymore. And I also was getting tired of people trying to tell me I have to figure everything out. And sometimes I feel like our striving to figure everything out and get it all straight and perfect is one of the things that I think is really actually hurting the world. And she said, but you know what? She said, I do hope there's a God. but she's like, but I'm agnostic. She's like, I would be happy to know there was a God if that God were compelling us to the kind of merciful world that you're talking about. And so I'm not there to convert people. I'm not trying to do anything like that. But it was a profound meeting point between me and someone who doesn't really claim faith anymore, but still in some way is spiritual and still needs that connection.
One more question for you guys before we go to break. Where are events held, and how do you ensure that the events are a safe space to give room, like this young woman who came up to you, Brandon, to express to you what she did?
Yeah, we've held events all over. So we've done some at churches, we've done some at coffee shops, at local breweries. One of the last ones was at East Nashville Beer Works. But we've been over at Caliber Coffee out in Donaldson and just a bunch of other places. And one of the biggest things that we do to ensure that safe space that you're talking about, that opportunity for people to feel comfortable to voice their opinions, know that there is disagreement in the area, and that this is okay. This is something we can foster and can have a cordial discussion on. We take time at the beginning of every single event to let people know exactly what we're doing, the reason that we're here. And we point out specifically how, oftentimes when we're not at that event, we're out grabbing coffee or tacos or something, just hanging out and just connecting with each other. And that constant reminder, whether it's halfway through the event, whether it's right before we tell everybody to get out because they're turning the lights off on us, that reminder, I think, is deeply important for all of us, honestly, even in our daily lives. Taking a few seconds to just go, you know what? This other person I'm talking to is a human. And for that reason alone, we don't need to justify anything else. That reason alone, they deserve my respect and compassion.
All right.
That's powerful.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Elliott and Brandon will be joined by Vanderbilt Divinity School professor Phillis Sheppard to discuss how we can bridge the divide between different beliefs. Stay with us. This is Nashville.
Funding for This is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Kaliole Colonna, and this is Nashville. Our topic today is belief, meaning, and how people can find common ground. We'll continue our conversation with Reverend Brandon Baxter of East End United Methodist Church and Elliott Martin from the Conversation Coalition, a group focused on moderating healthy conversation between believers and non-believers. But joining us now to add more depth to the importance of having discussion about different beliefs and points of view is Dr. Phillis Sheppard with Vanderbilt University School of Divinity. Dr. Sheppard, thank you for joining us. Welcome to This is Nashville.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Really an honor. Really an honor. In the previous segment, we spoke about the coalition and community goals and what the group would like to achieve. But in this segment, we kind of want to expound upon what the coalition has been doing by discussing how to bridge these gaps between non-believers and believers and people who have different ideas about faith and ideology. And Dr. Sheppard, sometimes I've been thinking about this. People who are religious kind of look at their faith as a basis, as a source of their good behaviors, as if, their religion inherently makes them good no matter how they treat others. What are your reflections on this type of inherent goodness, this idea of inherent goodness?
I think that's such an important question. One of the things I would say is that religion is one of the forces that help us say who we are, our identity, we belong. So the idea that my religion is inherently good, it provides the glue for that. The problem, obviously, is that it says everybody else is not inherently good as people and from their religious perspectives. I think one of the ways to grapple with that is, one, we need to know more about other religions. We need to become literate. And one of the ways I think we can become literate is to look at what other religions do around social issues. For instance, poverty, housing or the lack thereof, and discover the ways in which the goodness of our religions spurs us to act on behalf of the collective. That's, I mean, in addition to the conversations that need to happen, if we were to come together, and we see lots of places where that does happen, to respond to what's happening in the world, in our little neck of the woods, as it were, then I think that begins to create connections where we realize we can have values, we can have ethical views that connect, and we can have religious views and spiritual paths that are quite different.
So how can, we're in a time of great divisiveness, how can faith be used to bridge divisions between us?
There's a wonderful, it might be that helpful. There's a wonderful story in the Bible where Paul goes into this city and he wants to convert everyone. And he looks up and there are like all these images of different gods, and they're for different religions. But then there's one called the unnamed God. And he says, I'm speaking about this unnamed God. And what I take from that story is that Paul didn't say that one's wrong, that one's wrong. He says, there's a space for me here too. Now, many don't interpret that story that way, but I think that's what we have to do. Listen to the narratives that in religions that inform people's lives and be curious about them and ask ourselves collectively and individually, are there ways in which these narratives can actually inform the way I am in the world?
So one of our guests, Elliott, is an atheist who does not believe in God. How can you two find common ground through conversation?
Listening to what you were saying earlier, I think a common ground that we have is a deep curiosity and respect for other people just because they exist, regardless of what their religious views might be. And what I also heard you saying earlier is that you're curious and find creative energy around what people do with the fact that they don't believe. Some people try to convert others to their non-believing. Some people, such as yourself, try to create spaces for conversation. And I think that's really important right now. We were talking earlier outside about the number of people who feel isolated. A conversation around believing and not believing should create spaces where we can actually begin to hear each other, for instance, through the lens of isolation, through the lens of grief, through the lens of celebration, those kinds of things. So move toward what is it? What is the red thread that holds us in relationship to one another, connected to one another, which I then think prepares a path where we can actually begin to talk about our differences and what difference those differences mean.
Elliott, same question for you.
Yeah, I think there's so much that she just said that I totally agree with. And probably the biggest difference, the biggest disagreement is just where Phillis would say that common thread is that divinity from God that's within all of us, right? That imago Dei again. I just say that's just us. I just stop right. That's the only difference. When we both go out in the world and we meet somebody that is suffering, right? We both have the same empathy. We both have the same compassion. And if somebody came up to us right then and said, "Oh my gosh, why are you helping this person?" I don't think either of us would think much harder than, well, they're a person. They are suffering. They need that help. And that right there, I think, is one of the best things for us to focus on. that connection is what will make so much incredible progress and help with this isolation, whether you're religious or non-religious, especially in this area. If you've walked away from a faith, oftentimes your circle of connection dramatically decreases. And so we want to do something about that.
And so to that, if you in being here, this is the buckle of the Bible Belt, a deeply, deeply religious place, and churches play a pretty prominent role in the development of people's lives, not only spiritually, but socially, politically, professionally. Our church is driving certain demographics away. They're listed as places for all to come, but just in my life experience and also paying attention, not every church has open doors to everyone.
I'm gonna say something just a little spicy.
Okay.
We are supposed to be challenging and whatnot. I'm just gonna say, as an atheist, I'm not super upset that the churches are turning people away, right?
Okay.
Bring some more people to my side. Come on, guys, the water's fine. No, I do think there is a stark difference in a lot of the way that people profess their beliefs, especially, and how they understand what these stories in the Bible are telling, and how those stories were written. There's a lot of affirming churches in the area that are allied with LGBTQ people. I think that those types of churches are awesome for people that are in a religious faith that don't have that opportunity in other spaces. Even though I'm somebody, again, that started this out by saying, hey, great, leave the church, join me. I think those spaces are spaces that we as non-believers should champion, because those churches align with me and my friends a heck of a lot more than a lot of these other churches out there.
There's a thread running through some of what Phillis said and some of what Elliott is saying that I feel like is, when you ask the question about churches driving people away, I think that one of the things that I have enjoyed about the Conversation Coalition, and one of the things that I hope I'm helping them do maybe, and helping myself do as well, is embody and put into practice more what our values are, and test those through that than simply through an assent to dogmatic ideas that I have often seen happen at a lot of churches. I've also often seen it happen a lot through the quote unquote new atheist movement, where the whole point is to try to prove somebody wrong, also to try to say you have an absolute handle on everything that is true. And you cannot challenge me on that because I understand it perfectly. And I think when you do that, you drive people away. And I think if you're an atheist, you're less likely to rally people to your cause if you are dogmatic in that way. And I think the same thing is true for a lot of Christian churches and other kinds of religious faiths that might be what we might call inclined to having a real fundamental grasp on dogma alone. And that's not to say that our beliefs are not important, but we in our theological training we talk some about orthodoxy, right belief, but we also talk about orthopraxy, right action. And I think if our orthodoxy is not leading us to good orthopraxy, we have something to pay attention to. And I think that's a problem a lot of churches and other groups run into.
Is the dogma that is included in certain churches, is that creating an identity crisis right now where it's hard for churches to kind of step away from the orthodoxy and step fully into the orthopraxy, as you're saying?
I think most religious scholars would say that what we're calling the church is in a moment of paradigm shifting, and that does create an identity crisis. I also think in those churches where we might say they're pushing certain demographics away, that doesn't mean that those folks are leaving in such a way that they don't create spaces that provide meaning making, provide opportunities for ritual. Some of it's theological in the sense of the language that churches have. They're like, that's not my language. That's not the language I'm using. And we find this a lot at the Divinity School. So we have students coming to the Divinity School preparing for some form of ministry, but they're not using their grandmother's and their grandfather's religious language. So that's one. The other is that, yes, some churches are driving demographics away, and they think that's part of their job. They think that's what they're supposed to do. If you're not this, then you should leave. And that, I think, is incredibly painful to realize, because if we think of religious context as not only transformative for those who attend, but being a transformative force outside the four walls of the church, there's something being lost there. But it is true that whether it's LGBTQI, whether it's based on racial lines, gender lines, who can be ordained, who cannot be ordained, we have to face that some people are pushed out.
If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Ekolona. We're discussing the group Conversation Coalition and how they aim to bridge the gap between people with different beliefs. My guests are Dr. Phillis Sheppard, Elliott Martin, and Reverend Brandon Baxter. Okay, so, Reverend Baxter, let me ask you this. Do you have issues on how churches view other religions?
On how churches in general view other religions?
Yeah.
Yes, some. In my own tradition, in my own understanding, and as a United Methodist, I tend toward a little bit more ecumenism when it comes to our relationship with other Christians. And then I tend to try to be somewhat humble in the face of the truth claims of others. I think that's one of the things that brings me to the Conversation Coalition, because I want to be sure that I am hearing people and hearing how people understand the world, and not presuming. And I think sometimes those of us who are religious practitioners and we get caught up in our particular world. I mean, it's very easy as a minister in my tradition to get caught up in what I'm doing in my particular church, and at the most to get caught up in the inner workings of what is happening in my denomination. But it is very important for me to try to find opportunities to be in connection with people of other faiths and people of no faith, so that my understanding of the truth can be challenged, because I do believe that as somebody that believes in God, I believe God's working in and through everyone. And I believe I can learn from all sorts of different kinds of people, even people that I may disagree with. And I may change in some way. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Yeah, we all change. There's a lot of talk these days about people being a finished product. I want to be a finished product by age 25, 35, 45. And my belief, my understanding is the only time you become a finished product is when you take your last breath. Up until then, you have an opportunity to change, grow, and evolve. Let me ask this of you, Dr. Sheppard. How do Christians view non-believers in general?
Well, Christians cover the spectrum of what they think about non-believers in general. This might be a spicy thing to say, but I think some envy non-believers.
Why?
Because it can open a space for you to reflect on the world anew. It can be that space. So, yes, when you have this religious experience that tells you what's right, what's wrong, how to do this, how to do that, all of that, it's wonderful. It provides structure. It provides guidance, values, etc. But it can also mean that some things, there's a moratorium. You don't get to ask certain questions. And being a non-believer, or the potential in non-believing spaces to ask all kinds of questions, is opened up. Now, there are non-believing spaces that can be just as structured.
Yes.
No, we don't talk about that here. So, yes. But
I'm curious for all of you. I think I have an understanding what the answer to this question is going to be, but does being religious or non-religious make a difference in your everyday life and how you go about treating others? And most importantly, yourself. Dr. Sheppard?
It's interesting. In my classes, sometimes some students will ask me, well, are you a believer? Because I seem to have this open-spirited. And I always say, I am a believer, but the real question is, what difference does whether I believe or not? What difference does it make in terms of how I teach, what I teach, and what I expect? And the same is true, from my perspective, of my students. So it makes a difference because I appreciate the deep faith that I often reference my great-grandmother, Hattie Booker Peterson, for helping me to have. And that is, when I look out at the world and I see the things that I feel absolutely compelled to respond to, injustice, hunger, lack of housing, I do think it's connected to my religious understanding of love. And you spoke about love earlier, that love that is not informed by Hollywood, but that love that says, I am called, I am inspired to bring those who would be outside my circle into that circle. So I think it makes a difference. When I get up every morning, I pray. I pray two things. One is that I will be a nonviolent person. Two, that I'll be loving. And I say, if I don't pray that prayer, there could be problems.
Elliott?
Yeah, it does and it doesn't, right? I think one of the most interesting things for me when I went through that process, years worth of deconstructing these beliefs that I was raised with. So I was raised Methodist, just, very, very same as Brandon here. And so a lot of the things that he says, honestly, they hit me because, that's how I was raised. I understand that. When I first ever, said to somebody else, I just don't believe, I don't believe that there is a God. I don't believe that there is a soul. I don't think there's a heaven or hell. I don't think any of that anymore. One of the things that I was so fascinated by was the genuine interest in other people and the genuine care for other people that before I had attributed to the divine presence, right? That understanding sure was changed. No longer was it this, soul incarnating all of us that's the reason I be good. But no, I still had that genuine care. I still had that genuine interest. Now I just attribute the source to something different. And for me, that's again, just the innate fact that you're a person. That's all you have to do to hit that mark in my eyes.
For me, as somebody that has always tended toward faith, I think I've said to the Conversation Coalition before that, we are told in Scripture that faith is a gift. And maybe after hearing you talk, Phillis, maybe sometimes it feels like a curse too, because it's something I can't let go of. I have wrestled with it and wrestled with, is this really, do I really believe this? Do I really resonate with this? But my sense of the presence of God has continued to help center my life, help me feel connected to myself and love myself so that I may love others well in a way that I don't think I would have done if I did not have that innate sense of God working in me. And as a good Methodist, Khalil, I think you were talking about the complete person and that we'd be complete when we took our last breath. As a Methodist, we believe that God is continuing to work on us even beyond that and is continuing to work on all creation even beyond that. And that gives me hope, too, in a way that I don't feel like I have to finish all the good work in this world, but I do have to show up and do what is mine to do in this life that I live. And I also trust that God is continuing to work in many ways that I don't even understand.
All right. I'm really enjoying this conversation. We're going to take one more break. When we come back, we'll continue this conversation and explore how anyone can find meaning with or without religion. Stay with us. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil Kulona, and this is Nashville. Today, we're talking about how to bridge the divide between different faiths, beliefs, and ideologies. We have with us in studio Professor Phillis Sheppard with Vanderbilt School of Divinity, along with the co-founder of the Conversation Coalition, Elliott Martin, and Reverend Brandon Baxter. They're all here to talk about how to find common ground and to search for meaning. Again, thank you all for being here. I'm really enjoying this conversation. Tell me this. We'll start with you, Reverend Baxter. What does meaning mean to you?
What does meaning mean to me? Well, I think, first of all, I am a person that has all my life been searching for meaning. That's probably why I'm a minister today, because from as early as I can remember, I was trying to figure out myself and figure out the world. And a part of the fabric of life around me was also putting that into conversation with God and with what I understood and came to understand the divine to be. And so as I think about the meaning that has been made in my life and through my life over the years, I ultimately find meaning in growth, and in growth through learning and changing and connecting with other experiences, other people, other ideas. And at the same time, I find meaning in the things that are most important to me and speak truth to me. And so I still find meaning in my Christian faith. I find meaning in my United Methodist tradition. I find meaning as a member of a family and as a husband and a father. But all of those things alone don't define me. Mm-hmm. Meaning is made in the living, and I continue to learn new things about myself, learn new things about the world. And I do that in conversation in my thinking with others and also my God.
Elliott, what does meaning mean to you?
Yeah, I think it's that drive, that looking forward to something better than where we're at right now. I've always loved history, and there are fantastic stories throughout history of the absolutely incredible things that people have been able to do. And of course, I think we can all instantly think about all the terrible ones too, right? Mm-hmm. But what's so awesome to me is these totally real, totally corroborated, incredible stories that just make you go, oh my gosh, if we really foster community between ourselves, whether we believe or not, if we really focus and all pull in one direction, we can literally move mountains. We've done it. And that is so, so incredible. That to me is what gives me that excitement every morning. That to me is what gives that meaning. That today, sure, the end of that hallway may be impassable. It may be dark, but we can build a light. We can build something that will take us further. That's the coolest thing ever. And again, I think that is entirely human. And whether or not Phillis or Brandon say that comes from a divine source, it doesn't matter because we are pulling in the same direction.
Dr. Sheppard.
Powerful. For me, meaning has to do with, first of all, I see it as emergent. There is no one meaning. And the wider we extend our community gathering, the deeper and more creative meaning will be. So I was thinking yesterday, a group of colleagues were talking about how did we get into theological education. And I remembered a story from my undergraduate days. I wrote a history paper, and every place that I was supposed to put the word theory, it was typed, I put theology. And my professor, he just circled them all, and he said, Phillis, I think you should think about what this means. And, a few years later, I was in seminary. So to me, that's what I mean by emergent. I didn't know that was rumbling inside of me, but it emerged. Meaning always has to do with understanding what helps us collectively flourish and what diminishes that. And when we can't figure that out, we feel meaningless.
So how can believers and non-believers seek out meaning in their lives? Suggestions?
Yeah, I would say, one thing I think you can find common between all three of us is the tangible good works that we want to foster. We all see great value in going out and helping those that are unhoused, helping those that don't have food tonight, that have lost friends and family for whatever reasons, right? In Nashville, for instance, over the last handful of years, we've had a couple of different natural disasters. I don't think there's a single one of us that needs to find any justification, that needs to go through any scientific theory or theological understanding of why we should help those people, why we should care about our neighbors. That, I think, is one of the greatest places that we can all come together and find meaning together. When I can stand shoulder to shoulder with my friends and strangers, and we can all look at each other and say, hey, look, whether or not I think there's any life after this, I want to do something now. That's powerful.
It is.
I would, as a pastor in the Christian tradition, one of the things that I would challenge those that consider themselves believers to do to find meaning is to continue to explore the depth and breadth of their own tradition. I find that a lot of people that claim the Christian faith that I encounter, I'm not going to speak for everybody, but those that I encounter, a lot of times have very little understanding of their own scriptures, have very little understanding of the history of their own tradition, and for the breadth of thought and meaning-making, as Phillis said, the emergent ways of thinking that have been part of the Christian tradition and other religious traditions as well. And so that is a challenge that I think is a good one for those that consider themselves believers in this age to take up, especially if we say that we are believers in the Bible. If we're believers in the Bible, then you better know what the Bible says, and you better understand how it came to be and what the context is, and go beyond just knowing a few words. And so I think that there are many ways to make meaning. I don't think that's the only way to make meaning, but I think that's an important thing for believers to do, is to know their tradition and to dig deeper.
Dr. Sheppard.
I think one of the things that helps us a great deal is when we come together, not around religion, but around spiritual practices. I think that we know that ritual process is important in our lives, wherever we find it, but to come together with people who aren't coming together because they're Christian or Buddhist, etc. And what is the ritual and the spiritual dimension that emerges? So in many places where I facilitate or I'm a part of, people like to light sage, and that means a lot of things to them. Does it mean clearing the space? Does it mean inviting the memories of their ancestors into the space? Does it mean I plant my feet and I face the world flat-footed? So creating spaces where that sort of creative spiritual dimension can emerge and it not be hampered by conflicting religiosity. And then that way we create a diverse community right there that is not compelled to convert one another, but to be with one another.
Last question. I have just about a minute left. How should Nashvillians, Middle Tennesseans, and anyone who happens to listen to this, how should they respond to someone who feels differently than they do? Dr. Sheppard?
Welcome. I'd like to get to know you.
Yes, listen. Open your heart and open your mind.
Yeah, I'd say curiosity. I think that is one of the greatest things that we as humans have inside of us. And when you're genuinely curious, it is so, so hard to be hateful and destructive because the compassion just comes out. So, yeah, I think all of those.
Really appreciate you all being here. And I appreciate this conversation. It was truly enlightening for me and hopefully for listeners as well. Elliott Martin is the co-founder of the Conversation Coalition. Reverend Brandon Baxter is with East End United Methodist Church. And Dr. Phillis Sheppard is with Vanderbilt University's School of Divinity. Again, thank you all so much for being here. It's really important to have this conversation and to hopefully enlighten our listeners.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, and thanks to you for tuning in this hour. This is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio, and today's episode was produced by Josh Deepan, his first episode, y'all, that he produced. Congratulations, my friend. A fantastic one at that. It was directed by Tasha A.F. Lemley. Our technical director and board operator is Liv Lombardi. The masterminds behind our theme music are LaRange and Namir Blade. You can listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get great podcasts. The conversation doesn't end here. You can comment and tell us what you want to hear from the show by leaving us a message at 615-751-2500. Find us on Blue Sky and Instagram, and you can still hit us up on Twitter or X. Tweet us at This Is Nashville. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil Ekolona. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody, and be good to each other.